any day, you could wake up to a nuclear bomb detonated in an American city.
Terrorism.
You've got tunnels underneath the southern border that are built by Hezbollah.
4 أرطال من الأنثراكس يشيلها واحد فدائي ويدخلها من أنفاق مكسيكو إلى الولايات المتحدة كفيلة بقتل 330 ألف أمريكي.
There's going to be hell to pay in the not too distant future.
Something blew. Something big blew. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Just after noon, an immense blast roared through the subway station beneath Manhattan's landmark World Trade Center.
On February 26, 1993, radical Islamists declared a jihad on American soil as a bomb erupted at the base of the World Trade Center. The mastermind behind this strike against the United States was a man known as the Blind Sheikh.
When I was asked to take over the investigation in 1993, I didn't really know anything about jihadist ideology. I was a mafia prosecutor. I had to learn about it because my lead defendant was a guy by the name of Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman. He was known in America as the Blind Sheikh. He was a renowned figure in jihadist circles already by the time he resettled here in the early 1990s. And that was because of his association with the murder of President Anwar Sadat, which he bragged about having given the fatwa, or the Islamic religious edict, for.
The Blind Sheikh was a very high-ranking leader of the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt. And through some sort of foul-up, he had been allowed to enter the United States even though there was a murder warrant for him in Egypt. So looking into the background of that case, and started seeing the Muslim Brotherhood crop up as a movement based upon a particular interpretation of the theology of Islam.
In 2004, the FBI raided the Virginia home of Ismail el-Barassi, where they discovered evidence linking the Muslim Brotherhood to designated U.S. terrorist groups.
In that raid, the FBI found in the basement of this residence a sub-basement, and they discovered the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. One of the documents was the 1991 Muslim Brotherhood strategic document, which is called an explanatory memorandum, written by the #2 guy, Muhammad Akram, in the Palestine Committee, which is Hamas in the United States. And most importantly, it was approved by the governing bodies of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The document was eventually entered into evidence in a trial called the United States versus Holy Land Foundation, the largest terrorism financing trial ever successfully prosecuted in America.
The Holy Land Foundation called itself a legitimate organization dedicated to humanitarian needs, but the government accused it of funneling up to $12 million to Hamas.
I began the investigation of the Holy Land Foundation here in 1993 after there had been a meeting of members of that foundation with Hamas members in Philadelphia.
In many ways, the Holy Land Foundation trial provided kind of the Rosetta Stone to understanding the nature of the enemy we're confronting at the moment, both with respect to its ambitions, which are clearly said to be destroying Western civilization from within by our hands, but also insights into how they're doing it.
We had no doubt that they were a support organization and that CARE was one of the organizations that was again part of the Hamas network. Hamas itself was founded by the Muslim Brotherhood, and that their purpose was to create a situation for carrying out jihad wherever they had the opportunity, including within the United States.
CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations. It was founded in 1994 as a Muslim advocacy organization. During the Holy Land Foundation trial, Muslim Brotherhood front groups, CARE, and the Islamic Society of North America, known as ISNA, were among those named as unindicted co-conspirators in the case. ISNA was founded in 1982 as a Muslim community organization. One of its co-founders, Sami al-Arian, later pled guilty to terrorism charges. It has documented ties to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood.
The prosecutors filed memorandums to the court saying that ISNA is a financial support entity for Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization, which is why ISNA is an unindicted co-conspirator in this, the largest Hamas trial in U.S. history.
The Holy Land Foundation trial exposed a number of Muslim Brotherhood affiliates. However, these groups didn't disappear. They rebranded.
What they realized was, in America, if you hang a sign that says civil rights on anything, it will instantly be embraced by the press.
Since 9/11, no fewer than 15 CARE executives, staffers, directors, and advisors have been convicted or implicated in terrorism investigations. Yet the group remains a trusted source for many of the major U.S. news outlets.
National Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, thanks so much for being here with us. First question, first of all, list the tactics that you find particularly troubling.
Good morning, Deb.
Organizations like CARE have done an excellent job of penetrating the U.S. government by holding themselves out as a civil rights group and creating this Islamophobia phenomena.
CARE is skilled in public relations and media management, as the organization provides cover for the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliated groups.
I think American Muslims are also going to be able to point to a legacy of court cases that make America more free.
The military is a term for what's going on here. They call it information dominance. It's a critical part of a successful military operation. If you can get inside the head of your enemy, if you can impact or influence or shape his awareness of you, where you are, what you're doing, you give yourself an enormous leg up in defeating that enemy.
The foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood, and perhaps their biggest front group in the U.S., CARE, trace their roots to a part of the Middle East that has experienced radical transformation during the so-called Arab Spring.
What is absolutely clear is that we are witnessing history unfold. It's a moment of transformation that's taking place because the people of Egypt are calling for change. They've turned out in extraordinary numbers representing all ages and all walks of life. But it's young people who've been at the forefront. A new generation, your generation, who want their voices to be heard.
What we've seen since late 2010 is an arc descend upon the Middle East and North Africa. We've gone from largely secular dictatorships to radical Islamic dictatorships throughout the region. And for the first time in, say, half a century at least, we're hearing talk about the reestablishment of the Islamic Caliphate, which is a union, an Islamic superstate united militarily, economically, politically. Every Muslim nation acting as one all-powerful voice to take on Israel and take on the West, and speaking loudly, in particular, at the UN.
It is now an Arab winter, at worst an Arab nightmare, because when you look all across the Maghreb, when you look at what's going on in the Middle East, and especially in Egypt, you know, the things that we thought was going to be some revolutionary rising of democracy in the Islamic world is just really turned out to be radical Islamists who took advantage of very chaotic situations, and now they are moving themselves into power. I'll give you a great case in point with Egypt, where radical Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood are now about 78 to 80% control of the parliament.
وأنا بقول بصراحة أنا كراجل مصري مسلم مقتنع باستكمال تطبيق الشريعة الإسلامية في مصر.
Bassem Khafaji launched a presidential bid in Egypt in early 2012. He is a former resident of Ann Arbor, Michigan. In 2003, while serving as acting director of community affairs for CARE, Khafaji was arrested and convicted on terrorism charges. He was later deported. For many Americans, for many Westerners, their concept of freedom and democracy is not and never can be consistent with the political forces sweeping across the Middle East. Reza Khalili is not this man's real name. He is a former member of the Revolutionary Guard, Iran's elite military unit. His identity is being protected because of threats on his life from the government of Iran.
You cannot have a democratic system under Islamic government. That's not possible. Because Islam itself, it's a totalitarian ideology. It does not allow for you to have another opinion or to have a policy against Allah's will. And this is very clear in the Quran. So within any Islamic government, you cannot have democracy, you cannot have free will, you cannot have freedom of speech, freedom of press, and the laws are strictly the laws of Sharia law.
Experts warn that a failure to understand Sharia law will leave the West unprepared to deal with the emerging governments in the region.
Islam is a full-service social system with its own system of law. Its objective is not just to control your spiritual life, it's to control the entirety of your life. So it has rules on everything from combat down to rules of hygiene.
Islam is a political religion. That is, it's a religion which is attempting to create holy governments, holy states that follow Islamic law as interpreted by Islamic theologians and religious leaders. There's no religious freedom. There can be no freedom of speech under Islam. So there can be no democracy in a Muslim state.
The term Muslim Brotherhood is an umbrella term for a variety of movements. In the case of Egypt, a very heterogeneous group, largely secular, which has eschewed violence and has decried Al-Qaeda as a perversion of Islam.
Right.
They have pursued social ends, betterment of the political order in Egypt, and et cetera. And then
it's not a violent side I'm interested in. I'm interested in their nonviolent side, which I was talking about.
In other countries, there are also chapters or franchises of the Muslim Brotherhood, but there is no overarching agenda, particularly in pursuit of violence.
I was stunned
And I know that Jim Clapper knows better. I don't know if that's the party line and that's what he was asked to portray, whether he had a bad day or whether he just really doesn't know. But it's incredible after being in the intelligence business this long and being as bright as he is that he would say the Muslim Brotherhood was a largely secular organization. My goodness, doesn't the name itself give you a clue?
The Muslim Brotherhood, I mean, it's called the Muslim Brotherhood, is a secular organization, is really insane and very dangerous to have that kind of delusional attitude towards them.
Look, let's remember who we're talking about here. The Muslim Brotherhood is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to Islamic terrorist groups. The Brotherhood's founding charter, the creed they live by, says jihad is our way. Dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. It's been their creed since 1928. Today, that creed remains.
For decades, the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliated organizations have been recognized as having clear ties to terrorist groups. Their influence continues to expand in the U.S.
I just think across the board we are seriously missing the boat. And more importantly, the very people we're getting our advice from currently regarding the Islamic movement, terrorism, counterterrorism, are leaders in the Muslim Brotherhood. And those are the people advising our White House, State Department, FBI, CIA, DHS. That's a problem.
Arif Ali Khan was appointed by President Obama as Assistant Secretary for Policy Development at the Department of Homeland Security. Ali Khan once referred to Hezbollah as a liberation movement. He helped raise funds for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, IMPAC. The group is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Why is it that radicalization as a concept, or even a term, is rarely, if ever, used for terrorist movements or terrorists, other than Al-Qaeda or Islamic-related terrorist movements, for lack of a better word?
Salam al-Mariyati is the current president of IMPAC. In 1999, he was denied a leadership position on the National Commission on Terrorism by former Democratic leader Richard Gephardt when it was discovered al-Mariyati supported Hezbollah as a legitimate organization with a right to attack Israel. Perhaps most telling is the fact that IMPAC has issued policy papers which argue for the removal of Hezbollah and Hamas as designated U.S. terrorist groups.
The problem is 99% of the Americans don't know it. They don't realize it. It's not reported in the media. And those who do try to stand as a watchman, who do try to warn the people, are routinely criticized, dismissed, and marginalized.
In 2010, President Obama appointed a member of his legal team, Rashad Hussain, to a prominent envoy position at the State Department. However, a background check revealed that in 2004, Hussain spoke at the annual conference of a Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, the Muslim Students Association. Here, he defended convicted terrorist Sami al-Arian and criticized U.S. terrorism prosecutions as politically motivated persecutions. In 2002, Mohammed El-Abiyari founded the Freedom and Justice Foundation in Plano, Texas. Freedom and Justice is the political party of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He was appointed a member of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, which meant El-Abiyari had access to security documents. In October of 2011, it was reported he took sensitive reports from the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Were you aware of that?
No.
Thank you, Mr. I'm telling you it happened. Do we need to appoint somebody, or will you have that investigated yourself, and if so, by whom?
Well, since I don't know the facts, I'll have to look into the facts.
So you'll be the one to make that call?
We'll have somebody, it'll be myself or someone.
Does it concern you at all that it happened?
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, is recognized.
We are infiltrated. And if you look at the depth of that infiltration, it should be a cause for alarm.
For most Americans, it is beyond belief to accept the premise that forces hostile to the United States are so deeply embedded in U.S. culture, society, and government.
What I think the primary sticking point for most people is when you meet these men, these Muslim brothers, they dress well. Most of them that I've met have very good senses of humor. They know how to recruit. They are, many of them are trained intelligence officers. Those who are not, many of the original Muslim brothers that came here to the United States or the second generation, survived working underground in places like Egypt and the Middle East.
We need to understand that right now we are being infiltrated. We're being, looked at like lab rats, and they're probing, looking for the means by which they can establish their not just regional dominance, but global dominance.
People think that sounds like a science fiction plot. World caliphate, government under one religion. Ridiculous. No, it's not. That is exactly what the goals as laid out in its charter are.
I think it's important to say there are people in the United States who self-identify themselves as Muslims who don't subscribe to this. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who we can identify as a part of a defined movement that is specifically hostile to the United States and which seeks to overthrow our government and implement an Islamic State.
I've devoted most of the past 14 years to exposing the degree to which the Muslim Brotherhood, despite this clear statement of its hostility towards us and its desire to destroy us, from within, by our hands, has been succeeding at doing that by penetrating our government under both parties to the point where we now no longer can even describe the nature of the enemy we face.
The Brotherhood is a very sophisticated, ground-up operation in which terrorism is only one item on the menu. In other places, it's been more advantageous to the Brotherhood to infiltrate itself into the media, infiltrate itself into the political system, and in particular, and it does this almost every place it operates, infiltrate itself into the education system.
The Muslim Brotherhood created a whole series of organizations, the first of which, the very first national Islamic organization in America, was created in 1962 at the University of Illinois in Urbana, called the Muslim Students Association.
A 2007 New York Police Department report on radicalization identified Muslim student associations as forums for the development and recruitment of extremists. The North American Islamic Trust, based in Plainfield, Indiana, funds the Muslim Students Association. The organization was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial. In February 2012, the NYPD identified 12 former members of Muslim student associations who were later arrested or convicted on terrorism charges.
Anwar al-Awlaki, who was the mentor of the Fort Hood massacre, was the president of the Muslim Students Association at Colorado State. So there's a vast recruitment process going on within the United States for these forces.
Beyond college campuses, leaders from Muslim groups with ties to terrorism have significant influence on ranking U.S. officials.
The president of ISNA, Mohammed Majid, was just at the White House. He just met with the FBI director in February. He was present at meetings with members of DOD just recently. He sits on the DHS Homeland Security Advisory Committee, which creates or recommends policy for DHS for counterterrorism strategy in the United States. That's insane.
Let me remind everybody that CARE and ISNA and a host of other organizations in America are criminal organizations, declared so by a judge in Dallas, Texas in 2008. They were part of the Holy Land Foundation trial.
My experience is most members of the media have never heard of the Holy Land Foundation trial. most police officers at the state and local level, and by the way, most FBI agents, have never heard of the Holy Land Foundation trial.
In March 2011, in testimony before the House Judiciary Oversight Committee, FBI Director Robert Mueller said, "We have no formal relationship with CARE because of concerns with regard to the national leadership."
Now, why does the FBI have serious questions about CARE's leadership? It could have something to do with the fact that CARE's leaders, like Nihad Awad, have openly supported Hamas. Robert Mueller, our FBI director, eliminated at least 1,000 of the FBI's counterterrorism training documents after these Muslim Brotherhood front groups complained about them, said they were anti-Islam, Islamophobic.
The Council on American Islamic Relations is deeply troubled by persistent reports that the FBI employs biased trainers and materials to educate its agents. We believe that just as good training results in good investigations, biased training can result in biased investigations.
So what we have is our director of the FBI marching into the tune of the Muslim Brotherhood. We literally have Muslim Brotherhood front groups, Muslim Brotherhood satellite organizations in the U.S. advising our top counterterrorism officials. This is the fox guarding the henhouse.
Not only bothers me that they would purge from training materials things that agents could actually learn some things from about Islamist ideology, but that they would give these organizations input on what stayed and what went, to me is just baffling.
If I had been in that position, I would have told them they would have to fire me first before I would essentially mislead the law enforcement community into not recognizing the threat and to realize that an organization like CARE is not there to help law enforcement, it's there to protect the radical element of Islam.
Bob Mueller is a great patriot. He's a great man in my mind, and I know him personally. He, in his mind, if America was threatened, he would move heaven and earth to stop the threat. That said, I think he and his institution are captured by a very wayward philosophy.
This began under the Clinton administration. It became a tremendous problem under the Bush administration.
Americans look at it, they hear about it, they look to Washington, and they hear nothing. There's no validating concern being voiced by our own leaders.
I think that they find it staggering that the leadership in the United States is so grossly ignorant about who they are, when their doctrine, they say that Islamic law is what they fight in furtherance of and what they use to guide them and what they seek to impose. They find it staggering that leadership in the U.S. government hasn't even taken the time to just break open a book of Islamic law.
The American people are a welcoming and generous people. But those who enter our country illegally and those who employ them disrespect the rule of law. And because we live in an age where terrorists are challenging our borders, we cannot allow people to pour into the U.S. undetected, undocumented, and unchecked. Americans are right to demand better border security and better enforcement of the immigration laws.
The number one responsibility of a sovereign nation is to protect its borders. If it can't, it essentially can't be a sovereign nation. And if we can't protect our borders, and we have people who are threatening us not as a traditional national power, but as a secretive transcontinental terror network that relies on stealth in order to infiltrate itself into our society, and the violent jihadists among them to commit mass murder attacks, then border security becomes the whole ballgame.
I think the fact that we are not securing our border is criminal. It is the first responsibility of the administration, of the president and the administration, to protect Americans. We're not protecting Americans the way we're letting that border go unpatrolled.
The Arizona desert is littered with evidence of illegals coming from countries that are known enemies of the United States.
The Department of Homeland Security has just confirmed the discovery of a book celebrating suicide bombers found in an Arizona desert just north of the U.S.-Mexico border.
This Arizona rancher doesn't want to be identified. This Muslim prayer rug was found on his ranch.
You come to find out people with Arabic descent and also Somalis. So it is not just people coming here to the United States to find a job. It's about people coming here that are, for nefarious reasons.
Some agents over in the Naco area found 4 Arabic passports. They have been trailing this group, trying to catch them, and the aliens made it to the loadout point and got loaded out before the agents got there. Well, they found these 4 passports in Arabic, and I don't remember whether they figured out what country they were from or not, but it was after 9/11. They called the FBI in Sierra Vista and talked to an FBI agent. They told her about these passports and the other stuff that they found that were with it. I don't know what other stuff was with it, but apparently it was all in some backpacks. And the agent wasn't interested and said, well, next time you come to town, drop it by the office and we'll take a look at it.
According to Border Patrol estimates, between 2010 and 2011, only 5% of the individuals known to be crossing the border illegally were apprehended.
The truth of the matter is we don't know how many people are coming into the United States, period. Much less how many of them are from the Middle East. Are people from the Middle East coming in? Yes, we know that because we catch them. Does Department of Homeland Security put that on the front page of the paper every month? No. Why not? Because they don't want us to know. Try to get that information. See how easy it is.
In an attempt to address border security and confront illegal immigration, the Arizona legislature passed Senate Bill 1070. When it became law, it was considered the toughest anti-illegal immigration act ever passed by a state in U.S. history.
Our citizens have a constitutional right to the expectation of those laws being enforced, be protected from those who break our laws. That's their right, not just is it a nice thing to do.
Senate Bill 1070 has received national and international attention and has spurred considerable controversy and debate, especially from the Department of Justice and the Obama administration.
They said we needed to triple the Border Patrol. Or now they're going to say we need to quadruple the Border Patrol. Or they'll want a higher fence. Maybe they'll need a moat. Maybe they want alligators in the moat. They'll never be satisfied.
Arizona acted in a way that is not only consistent with federal law, it seeks to bolster federal law. What the Obama administration's position is that a state doesn't have to be consistent with federal law. It has to be consistent with executive branch policy.
But Arizona uses its constitutional police powers to protect its citizens, to defend the rule of law, and we get sued by our own government. This is the first time in the history of the United States that I'm aware that a sitting president has sided with 4 nations to sue its own citizens.
And the thought that you would take them to court over it, and the reason that the rationale of taking them to court over it is that we, the executive branch, don't want to enforce immigration law, and by enforcing it, you are interfering with our policy of non-enforcement that, by the way, is endangering your citizens. The thought that you would take a state to court over that? It's repulsive.
And the federal government has some very clear responsibilities to secure and protect our borders, which they're failing to do. So therefore, the states must do that to protect their people. And when you talk about different parties, I mean, some people want to see the cheapness of labor, and other people want to see a voting electorate bloc that will keep them in control. But we've got to think about what's best for this country overall.
These are bad guys coming across. There's nothing to stop these guys from entering that country along that southern border. It is absolutely open if you know the routes, if you have the money to access guides or the equipment to get through. That is the easiest border to access.
323 miles of the 376-mile Arizona-Mexico border has some fencing. However, few physical barriers exist that actually prohibit crossing. The largest open area in the West Desert is the Tucson sector.
I can't go into specific investigations, but we've had investigations that we know that elements of the Hezbollah are here, and certainly coming across that border, which is totally porous, they would not have much difficulty in getting here in some numbers.
Over 50% of all illegal entries into this country come through Arizona, and if you will, the San Luis Nogales port of entry area.
In an attempt to confront this overwhelming trend, thousands of new border guards were hired. However, the Department of Homeland Security may have unknowingly employed individuals willing to compromise border security.
Most of the agents that are working today have very little experience. They were hired in a hurry. They were hired without background checks. We're pretty sure some of the people they hired are connected with the cartels. Anybody that knows anything about defeating any type of law enforcement effort knows that information and informants are invaluable. And if they've got informants on the inside of the Border Patrol or the inside of the Customs Service or the inside of Homeland Security anywhere, one of those people can erase the work of 100 men in just a very few minutes.
Is it your belief there are those people?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they're there.
Increasing corruption along the border has been traced as far back as 2004. According to the Los Angeles Times, since then, more than 130 border guards have been indicted or convicted on corruption-related charges.
Border corruption impacts national security. A corrupt DHS employee may accept a bribe for allowing what appear to be undocumented aliens into the U.S. while unwittingly helping terrorists enter the country.
Nobody's afraid of the federal government. They know the green light that's been turned on by this administration. They're releasing them by the thousands after they're in custody. They're refusing to enforce the law. Nobody's afraid of this federal government.
These groups allow them to operate freely in our neighborhood, and they're getting closer to our doorstep. And if we don't do something about it and really get serious about it, then, again, I don't want to sound too crude, but I think there's going to be hell to pay at some date in the probably not in the not too distant future.
The center of this activity is from the Revolutionary Guards. They have long been involved in drug trafficking and money laundering. They have expanded this activity into Africa, into Latin America. They use Hezbollah to do this, and they have a very close collaboration with drug cartels and the Russian mafia.
Now we have opened this thing up to be a truly national security issue. The fact that you have a country such as Iran in collusion with Mexican drug cartels and supporting an assassination attempt up here in Washington, D.C. against not one but two ambassadors, the Saudi and also the Israeli ambassador. That's an act of war, and we need to see it as such. And like I say, you got to secure your borders.
Tell me the situation where you came in direct contact with a person from the Middle East and the conversation you had.
Well, immediately behind us, across that low set of hills, is a place called Keno Springs, and there's a golf course there. And one morning about daylight, some Border Patrol agents caught a group of Middle Eastern people there. In the group, they did not catch the whole group, which is common. In the group they did catch were 3 people from Syria and some people from Yemen. And they brought them to the station. I was the supervisor on duty that day. And one of the agents called me into one of the write-up rooms and said, this guy claiming he came here from Syria to be a terrorist. He says, you need to talk to him. So I went in there and I talked to the guy for quite a while. And he convinced me that he was serious, that he came here to engage in terrorism. He didn't know what type, what he was going to be expected to do, but he was on his way to Chicago, Illinois.
We know there's a lot of drugs coming across, but what else is coming across? Now that we have terrorist organizations in Mexico working with drug cartels, what are they bringing across our border, and what are they going to do with the things they bring across our border?
4 أرطال من الأنثراكس، 4 أرطال، جنطة هالكبر يشيلها واحد فدائي ويدخلها من أنفاق مكسيكو إلى الولايات المتحدة كفيلة بقتل 330,000 أمريكي.
The idea of a mass murder attack is mass murder. That's what they're trying to accomplish. And there's no question that if they had the opportunity to do it, they would do it.
They're thinking about it, and I believe they're doing it, and I think there's ample evidence that they're bringing contraband across this border that is meant to do us harm.
According to the National Association of Former Border Patrol Officers, the drug cartels have established a 250-city distribution network in the U.S. They believe the partnership between Hezbollah and the drug cartels means Middle Eastern terrorists may have access to the network.
You've got narco drug cartel tunnels underneath the southern border that resemble what you find in southern Lebanon that are built by Hezbollah. So we believe there's some of that connection as well.
The former top commander of Revolutionary Guards, Hassan Abbasi, and the current strategist of the Guards in Iran has said that over 800 sensitive sites in America has been identified. And the cells are going to attack those once confrontation takes place. So have no doubt, our water supply, food supply, nuclear plants, power plants, bridges, these are all likely targets for them because creating fear in the heart of infidel is their duty. It must take place.
Going back into the early 80s, we created a relationship with the Nuclear Emergency Search Team, NEST, because we knew that nuclear weapons were now of such size and dimensions that they could be, our nuclear materials could be smuggled into the United States.
If you were to explode with conventional explosives, anything that would throw out contamination, and it was detected, can you imagine what would happen in Washington? The pandemonium? Do you think that our Congress would reconstitute? Do you think that our Supreme Court would reconstitute? They could shut our government down. Just by bringing that stuff across the Mexican border, eventually getting it to Washington and setting it off in the back end of a truck with conventional explosives, and you get a nuclear contamination. People won't wait to see whether it's going to be of such strength that it's going to kill a lot of people. It will throw them into pandemonium.
In March 2007, while being held at Guantanamo Bay, 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed confessed that, quote, I was directly in charge of managing and following up on the cell for the production of biological weapons, such as anthrax and others, and following up on dirty bomb operations on American soil. In February 2011, a shocking interview with a U.S. Customs and Border officer in San Diego confirmed the urgency of the threat to America.
So specifically, you're looking for the dirty bomb. You're looking for a nuclear device.
Correct. Weapons of mass effect.
You ever found one?
Not at this location.
But they have found them?
Yes. Well.
I know that you're off camera, the public affairs officer interrupted. Okay. You never found one in San Diego, though?
I would say at the Port of San Diego, we have not.
Have you found one in San Diego?
Again, we'll just talk about the Port of San Diego. I'll follow up later.
Besides being San Diego's assistant port director, Haller is also a Customs and Border Protection officer. Do you ever find things that are dangerous? I mean, like a chemical agent or a weaponized device?
At the airport seaport, at our port of entry, we have not this past fiscal year, but our partner agencies have caught items like that.
We asked which agency, what type of weapons, when and where was the discovery made. We were promised a response later. It came 23 days after this interview in a carefully worded statement, saying Customs and Border Protection has not specifically had any incidents with nuclear devices or nuclear materials at our ports of entry. Once again, this was the original question for Al Haller. You ever found one?
Not at this location.
But they have found them?
Yes.
Haller confirmed weapons of mass effect were found in the past year, but not in the port. This was reinforced by another brief conversation. Do you ever find anything on ships like this?
In terms of radiation sources?
In terms of anything dangerous to the country?
We have not found anything at this location.
In addition to the domestic threat, equally troubling is the reality that the U.S. could very soon be facing another Cuban Missile-type crisis.
In 2010, a leading German newspaper, Die Welt, reported that Iran is seeking to establish missile bases in Venezuela, at America's doorstep. Now, if Iran did establish a base in Venezuela, we know they have mid-range missiles. They could reach the Panama Canal easily from Venezuela. They could reach Florida, major cities there, from Venezuela.
There was a pact written and signed by Chavez and Ahmadinejad, which was not made public. It was part of a bigger pact. Khatam al-Anbiya base in Iran has been assigned to build a missile site in Venezuela, close to Paraguay, and the guards have visited the site. The engineers have drafted the plans, and they are collaborating to build that site.
Well, if you look at all these reports of the Iranian-supplied missiles going into Venezuela, first of all, you can see this is a very credible scenario because Hugo Chavez hates America almost as much as Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So they're natural allies. They both hate us. They both want to do us harm. Are we set up right now to defend ourselves against missiles out of South America? My assessment as a former military guy is no, we're not.
In their ideology, they teach that non-Muslims are a lesser form of being than Muslims. There's a certain coarsening that goes on in the way that children are reared, such that they begin to look at non-Muslims who they regard as enemies as a lesser form of life. That's important because it's a way to rationalize mass murdering people, which most normal people who believe in the sanctity of life and the equality of human beings would find too horrifying to contemplate.
Time is running out. The hinge of history may soon turn. For the greatest danger of all could soon be upon us. A militant Islamic regime armed with nuclear weapons.
Any conflict between Israel and Iran will have serious consequences that will impact the U.S. immediately.
I think Israel has already made the decision. I think they've determined and calculated what their red line is. I don't know what that is. It's certainly not the same as the United States. I think their red line is approaching very quickly.
The U.S. and Israel have had a series of successes in this covert war against Iran's nuclear weapons program. We've had assassinations, we've had sabotage, and all of that's great. And to a degree, it has set back the Iranian nuclear weapons program. But I've talked to Israeli officials who have told me, look, Stuxnet, the computer virus, was great. The assassinations are great. But at the end of the day, it's only a bump in the road for the Iranians. Ahmadinejad himself has said Iran's nuclear weapons program is, quote, like a train with no brakes. Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has said clearly, sanctions will not stop our nuclear program. It's a done deal. They will not stop. The only thing that will stop them, and it's a nasty proposition, but it's the only thing that will work, is military action.
Yet, the Obama administration has dealt with Iran mostly in economic terms, using sanctions as the weapon of choice. Further, President Obama and his advisors still feel reasoning with the Iranian leadership can avert disaster.
I've been confronting that question since I commanded Central Command in 2008. And we are of the opinion that the Iranian regime is a rational actor. And it's for that reason, I think, that we think the current path we're on is the most prudent path at this point.
Rational is taking teenage girls, raping them before execution, raping boys in prison before execution, executing tens of thousands of Iranian youth in one summer without any trial.
So you have all this atrocious, provocative behavior by a nation whose motto is death to America. And it's not just a slogan as far as they're concerned. That's their #1 national policy.
And rational is to blow up the Marine barracks in Beirut, to take hostages, to create Hezbollah, to arm Hezbollah, to arm Islamic Jihad.
Everything Iran has done over the past 32, 33 years, this Iranian regime, flies in the face of rationality.
This is a mistaken policy of appeasement because we still don't understand the ideology. Deceive thy enemy until such time you are strong enough to kill them.
The Iranian vision is clear. The regime is committed to its ultimate goal.
And I've said this for a long time, that they want the bomb, they're going to get the bomb, and they're going to use the bomb. And this world is going to enter one of the greatest depressions that humanity has seen.
The clock is ticking, and a showdown is on the horizon. For the Israelis, an attack appears inevitable.
I think this is a very hard target for Israel. I think it would be a hard target for anyone, including the United States. First of all, it's a long ways from Israel. Secondly, their intelligence has to be absolutely precise as to what targets or combination of targets would actually destroy the program or more likely set it back for some extended period of time. See, I don't see it as an in-and-out operation. First of all, I think if they do it, I think that they will use a combination of things. I think we'll see drones. I think we'll see both ship and submarine-launched missiles, as well as aircraft.
The most important thing is what happens the day after. Israel needs the United States support as far as, mid-air refueling, aerospace clearance, the right type of munitions, intelligence sharing. But when you think about what can occur the day after, when you have over 50,000 medium and long-range rockets and missiles in southern Lebanon, when you have mortars and rockets all over Gaza Strip controlled by Hamas.
Yes, it will get ugly. Yes, Tel Aviv will be targeted. In the Iranians' view, in their twisted apocalyptic ideology, taking out Tel Aviv, and look, the Israeli counterattack, the Israeli response to a nuclear attack on, say, Tel Aviv, God forbid, would be overwhelming. Israel would nuke Tehran, major Iranian cities, kill 30 million, 40 million Iranians, absolutely. But the Iranian regime says, you know what? It's worth it. We have 70, 75 million people, a very young population. To sacrifice half of our population for the cause, martyrs for Allah, for the greater good in their view of wiping the Zionist entity off the map once and for all, the Iranians think it's worth it. They like those odds, and they will take those odds.
You see, an attack alone on the nuclear installations of Iran would not be successful, would not have a successful outcome. It will expand the war. Iranians would respond. Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, others would get involved, and the region will probably see a regional war. We should expect attack in the Strait of Hormuz, an increase in the oil prices immediately, and we should expect terror attacks in Europe and America.
Another after effect of an Israeli attack on Iran, could very well be political instability in the United States.
I think looked at objectively, there has never been more daylight between the United States and Israel since the founding of the modern Jewish state than there is under the Obama administration.
Now, I think it's possible we could see a conflict between the president and the Congress, where the Congress would want to support Israel and the president potentially would not.
What the Obama administration has done, not just once or twice, but I think repeatedly, is create the perception in the minds of our enemies that we are not on Israel's side. To the extent we've done that, either by the actions of Obama administration officials themselves, or whether it's the conduct of the president himself with respect to Bibi Netanyahu, it unmistakably conveys to Israel's enemies and ours that there's no longer a united front, and the chances for picking us off serially are present. And I can't imagine a more dangerous policy to be pursuing at a moment like this.
They are very emboldened right now. Actually, they're so much emboldened that they're excited. They're excited, and you can see this in the rhetoric. What they say that they can destroy America, or if America dares to attack, or if Israel dares to attack. This is more than rhetoric. This is not for their loyalists within the government. This is what they truly believe.
America is clearly Iran's ultimate target. Clearly, we are the great Satan. And one way to get at America, and an easy way, quite frankly, is through an EMP attack, an electromagnetic pulse attack.
Consider every major city in America, how does it get its water supply? Consider that every major city in America, its average food supply on hand is 21 to 28 days. Consider, where do we get our medication? Consider what happens in nursing homes and hospitals. What happens to our transportation grid? Anything driven that, well, most of them have computers in them, they're all gone. So we've known about the capability of EMP. The first study had the commission headed by Roscoe Bartlett, Republican out of Frederick, Maryland, 2004. Testimony in that study indicated 90%, let me repeat that, 90% of all Americans will die within 12 to 18 months after an EMP event. This study was done in 2008. Has anything been done since? No.
However, there was an attempt to protect Americans in early 2010 when House Bill 5026 was introduced. The law would have authorized the federal government to take emergency measures to protect the U.S. power grid from solar flares and EMP weapons. It passed the House of Representatives by a unanimous voice vote in August that year. However, Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski helped kill the legislation in favor of a clean energy bill backed by Senate Democrats.
And we know how much it costs to run a bill through and how many years of work and how many hundreds of experts were involved in that. We had one self-centered senator who killed the bill.
If Iran develops nuclear capacity, the United States would certainly become a first strike target. And a plan to execute a coastal launch has been in place and tested for nearly a decade.
For years, the Iranians have been taking a container ship out into the middle of the Caspian Sea and firing rockets straight up. And then they detonate the rocket and say, oh, it was a failure, didn't go into orbit. I mean, that is the signature. That is a clear signature of training for an EMP launch. Put the missile straight up.
They said that America should not be surprised if their vessels find their ways into the Atlantic Ocean and get close to the Gulf of Mexico and strike America.
Get that container ship 100, 200 miles off the Gulf of Mexico. Doesn't need any sophisticated guidance system, anything like that, for precision impact.
And these missiles in a container, ballistic missiles, can be launched in less than 60 seconds with a nuclear warhead and blast in the sky and create an electromagnetic pulse attack where it would destabilize the infrastructure of America within hours, and we will be sent back to the 18th century.
Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. We had plenty of clear warning we were going to go to war with Japan in December, and it finally starts on December 7th. We could recover from that. We did. We fought a defensive war for a year. We took horrible, horrific losses in the Philippines and across the Pacific. In this new age of EMP first strike, there's no recovery time. There is no recovery. It is a first strike capability that is a fatal blow in the opening move.
We now are fighting against radical Islamic totalitarianism. And this is just a worse enemy, I think, than what the Soviet Union proposed with communism, because back then you had mutually assured destruction. You know, both sides really did not want to, hit the button and shoot nukes back and forth at each other. But in this case, when you have a theocracy that drives people, there's no bounds, there's no limits for them.
I think we have come so far from being a logic-based society, an Enlightenment, rational thinking society that actually looks at 2 + 2 and sees it equals 4, that facts that interfere with a narrative, which is that Islam is a moderate religion, there are just a few extremists who've hijacked it. If it interferes with that narrative, it is to be eradicated, ignored, and anyone who talks about it is to be marginalized. In 2008, the Bush administration released a guidance to federal agencies telling them not to use the words jihad, jihadist, mujahideen, Islamic terrorism, even Islamofascism, which is actually a nonsense term. This was the culmination, I think, of a very Orwellian process that taught us how to think. It's a kind of groupthink, it's a kind of newspeak, and it destroys our abilities to assess facts.
It's sort of ridiculous when we were investigating the mafia, the La Cosa Nostra, and we would say Italian organized crime. We weren't accusing all Italians of being members of organized crime. When we were investigating the Jewish Defense League, well, we were only investigating those Jews that were involved in a radical group that was committing criminal acts.
They are trying to outlaw free speech against Islam. They call it outlawing defamation of religion, and Hillary Clinton is teaming up with this. She has teamed up with a group called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is almost like the United Nations, except it's all Islam. It's the second largest international group in the world.
The OIC touts itself as the collective voice of the Muslim world. Its charter promotes religious tolerance. However, the OIC is actively and openly anti-Israel.
People tend to look to leaders for setting the tone. Our leaders don't care. They do not care. I don't believe they care a whit. I'm amazed they can all sleep at night, but they can.
In 2010, the National Counterterrorism Center invited Sheikh Kifa Mustafa to participate in a 6-week training program. Mustafa, a Chicago imam, was named as an unindicted co-conspirator by federal prosecutors in the Holy Land Foundation trial.
Yes, Diana West, Washington Examiner. I actually had the opportunity to quiz our top security officials on this at a conference in Washington. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, the NCTC Director, Michael Leiter, and indeed Director Mueller himself. How could you let a Hamas operative, Hamas being a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, into this installation? Did you know that a known Hamas operative was invited by the FBI into a 6-week training session, Sheikh Kifa Mustafa, and is that the kind of problem you're talking about? What is your reaction to that? No comment. Punted the answer, tried to kick it upstairs.
Well, I think the FBI will be here later. I think the FBI has, you can speak to them about that.
Mueller himself wouldn't make a call on that either, just talked about outreach.
So I'm not going to talk about any particular individual, but I can tell you that that portion of our outreach is tremendously important, and we do look into the individuals that we invite into the Citizens Academies.
We do a 3-day training program as kind of our preeminent training program on the Islamic movement, their doctrine, and then how law enforcement officers and members of the military and people in the intelligence community can use this information. And we did one not that long ago at Headquarters Marine Corps to about 110 members of law enforcement intelligence community that include DHS, FBI, National Joint Terrorism Task Force, Joint Terrorism Task Force from around the country, military, special operations guys, about 110 or so of them. On day 3, after they've heard all this, a guy stood up and he said, "John, I've been in the FBI over 14 years. I am a supervisor at FBI headquarters in the Counterterrorism Division, and I've never heard any of the information you all have just put out over the last 2.5 days." And he was pissed.
We go to 2011. There was to be a 3-day conference at the CIA on homegrown radicalization. Well, a very much homegrown radical group, CARE, put pressure on the CIA, and poof, the conference was canceled.
Now, the fact that they still have credibility with our media is just incredible. The fact that they can criticize me and others like me who have been speaking openly about what they're up to, who have been trying to get the truth out about who they are and what their intentions are for America, and then they can criticize me and get away with it. They can criticize me and cause such an uproar in the media that I'm forced to drop out of an event at West Point where I was there to speak about the Christian faith and faith in general, and it's a sad state of affairs. Look, I'm not surprised by any of it. They've targeted people like me and Frank Gaffney and a variety of others because we have been trying to tell people what's happening in this country.
So if you look at this as sort of a 1-2 process, you see the propaganda kick in during the Bush years, and now you see its implementation, and so therefore we are just flying blind.
On February 22, 2012, Pennsylvania Judge Mark Martin dismissed assault charges against Talag El-Bayami, a Muslim. El-Bayami admitted attacking a man dressed as the Prophet Muhammad in a Halloween parade, but the judge cited a lack of permissible evidence and said that the plaintiff was outside the boundaries of his First Amendment rights.
We have our courts now responding to Islamic law. In 2010, there was a New Jersey family court that did not give an abused wife a restraining order against her husband, a Muslim, because under Islamic law, he could do anything he wanted to her. He could be violent to her under Islam. This was a case of marital rape, which is okay under Sharia. But we actually have a Supreme Court justice, Justice Kagan, who is very enthusiastic about Sharia law. And when she was dean of Harvard Law School, did much, well, she also received much from Saudi Arabia in the law school. They have 3 endowed chairs at Harvard Law School endowed by Saudi Arabian money. She did much to promote Sharia at Harvard Law School. So the courts are very vulnerable to these incursions of Islam. And these are just several examples.
We have the highest office in this country, the President of the United States, apologizing for that. So in second and third order effect, we've lost 6 United States servicemen. We now have the United Nations telling us that we need to charge these individuals and hold them accountable. Accountable for what? So we continue to make ourselves seem lesser, and instead of standing up for our cultural values.
I would like to speak directly to the people and leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
He calls Iran the Islamic Republic of Iran, and he has sent multiple messages to Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, that he respects the Iranian regime, that he wants to negotiate based on mutual respect. And these signs are interpreted by the leaders of Iran as a sign of weakness.
It was reported that New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly had been investigating Islamic student organizations and mosques in New York and New Jersey. On March 18, 2012, Attorney General Eric Holder labeled the actions as disturbing, and the Justice Department launched a formal review.
Law enforcement officials who have an IQ of over 11 can figure out what's going on in a radical mosque.
And I can tell you that the mosques are being used, and I tell you this with my experience, are being used as a command center for recruitment, for a transfer of cash, arms.
I'm disappointed in the process that has come about at our national level, and I don't think that we should be stigmatizing Islam. I don't think that Muslims in this country should feel put upon. But they themselves are the ones that are suffering consequences when the radical element is the only element that's heard.
There's the very, very, very famous analogy by Malcolm Muggeridge, who said that Western society was like a frog that was placed in a pot of room temperature water, set on the stove. The heat is turned up so slowly that the frog never knows he's been boiled alive. He dies. He doesn't even know it's happening.
So we are whitewashing ourselves, and again, we are going to end up being a victim of political correctness. And one thing that I always tell people is that when tolerance becomes a one-way street, it leads to cultural suicide, and we're on that street.
Interesting thing is, we don't have to speculate about what Ronald Reagan would do. We know what he would do, because we know what he did do. In the 1940s, he saw the penetration of his community, his industry, the film industry, by communists. And he recognized that it was insidious. What they were trying to do was to use that community to destroy his country. And at great personal risk, not only to himself, his career, but to his family, he stood up and said, these people are doing this. And he named their names, and he testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee to help counteract what they were doing, to roll up that communist infiltration. And I believe that what Ronald Reagan would do today would be similarly courageous and decisive, to show by his personal leadership and example that we cannot afford to have our society, our institutions, our government penetrated by enemies seeking explicitly our destruction.